Okay. All right, I'm going to begin. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third segment of the Dawn Lafferty Hawksprung Winter Spring 2021 webinar series. My name is Dr. Jerry Steele, Assistant Professor and Chair of the Doctoral Program in Educational Leadership at Russell Sage College. This webinar series is offered under the auspices of the Hawksprung Center at Russell Sage College and in association with the New York State Council of School Superintendents. The Hawksprung Center was established in memory of Dawn Lafferty Hawksprung, the principal of Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, Connecticut. Dawn was a member of Albany Cohort 6 and had just completed her first semester in the doctoral program when that tragic day occurred. The mission of the center is to promote mental health and school safety. Our topic this afternoon is pivoting during a pandemic, systems and structures to respond to COVID-19. The final webinar in this series will be held on May 19th. Now let me introduce our panelists and moderator for our program this afternoon. Our first panelist is Dr. Clarence Ellis. Dr. Ellis serves as the Community Superintendent of Schools in District 17, which is located in the Crown Heights section of Brooklyn. He is responsible for the supervision and administration of 32 schools, serving over 20,000 students from pre-K to grade 12. District 17 encompasses the diverse central Brooklyn communities of Crown Heights, Prospect Heights, East Flatbush, and Lefferts Gardens. Since his arrival, District 17 has demonstrated substantive gains in English language arts and mathematics across grades K-8, as well as improved graduation rates at the high school level. Dr. Ellis has been committed to a life of service, the son of immigrant parents who stressed that education was the key that unlocks the doors of opportunity. His parents also believed, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. Dr. Ellis's covenant to be an equity advocate has led to a 35-year career grounded in the philosophy of children first. Proudly, Clarence is a recent graduate of the Russell Sage Doctoral Program in Educational Leadership from New York City Cohort 6. Our second panelist is Dr. Elizabeth Wood. Dr. Wood is the Deputy Superintendent in the Shenandoah Central School District just north of Albany, New York. As the academic leader for the district's 9,600 students, Dr. Wood is committed to providing a positive experience for every student and helping all students realize their full academic potential. Prior to her work in central office, Dr. Wood was a high school teacher, middle school assistant principal, and elementary principal. Dr. Wood is also a graduate of the Russell Sage Doctoral Program, a proud member of Cohort 4 in Albany. Dr. Wood is also active in NISAWA, the New York State Association for Women in Administration. Our final panelist is Dr. Angelina Maloney. Dr. Maloney is the superintendent of the Brunswick Central School District in Rensselaer County, sometimes referred to as Brittenkill. That's how we know it here. Angelina has been in education for over 20 years, starting as a chemistry and physics teacher, as well as teaching middle school science and university in the high school classes. She received her master's degree from the University of Albany and recently completed classes through Harvard's Certificate in Advanced Educational Leadership. Dr. Maloney is on the Council of Delegates for NISCUS and a vice chair on the executive committee for the Capital Area School Development Association, referred to as CASDA. Dr. Maloney was recently appointed to the New York State Professional Standards and Practices Board for teaching. Dr. Maloney is also active with Russell Sage College, serving students and supporting the Doctor of Education Leadership Program as an executive coach and adjunct professor. Dr. Maloney is also a graduate of the Russell Sage Doctoral Program and Educational Leader, a proud member of the first doctoral cohort, Cohort 1. The moderator for our discussion this afternoon is Dr. Doug Huntley. Dr. Huntley's public school career spanned over 44 years, the last 30 of which he was superintendent of schools. His most recent superintendency was for 12 years at the Queensborough Union Free School District, from where he retired. During his time in education, Doug was a frequent presenter for school districts and educational organizations. In addition, he has also served as an adjunct professor at several institutions of higher education, including Russell Sage College. Dr. Huntley is currently the co-director of the New York State Council of School Superintendents Future Superintendents Academy. He is also the facilitator of the NISCUS New Superintendents Institute. Each of these is a year-long program conducted in a cohort model with the desired outcome of preparing and sustaining the highest level of leadership in New York State public schools. And again, Doug is a graduate of the Russell Sage Doctoral Program in Educational Leadership, a proud member of Albany Cohort 3. And without any further ado, I would like to turn our program over to Dr. Huntley. Doug?
Thank you, Jerry, so much. I'm honored to be moderating this distinguished group of panelists, Dr. Wood, Dr. Ellis, and Dr. Maloney. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Never in our lifetime have public schools been faced with the impact of a pandemic to the magnitude of the coronavirus. Every day since the pandemic caused schools to close, new and different challenges have presented themselves to administrators, teachers, support staff, and just about everybody. The topic of this webinar is most appropriate: pivoting during a pandemic, systems and structures to respond to COVID-19. So as we enter our discussion, we'll focus on these systemic and structural responses that schools have made or plan to make to address the challenges that COVID-19 presents. I'm going to ask a question of our panelists. I'll start with one panelist, and then the other two panelists will follow, and we'll rotate through each of the panelists with new questions. So the first question for the panelists, and this goes to Dr. Wood. So Elizabeth, learning loss is a term that's being used for a number of reasons as schools try to understand the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on children's learning. Notably, addressing the issue of learning loss is now tied to the ability of school districts to receive a portion of their federal aid allotment. So in your district, and I will be, after you respond, Elizabeth, I'll be turning to Angie and Clarence. So in your district, what does learning loss mean to you? And what's your district doing about this issue?
Yeah, it's a great question. And you're absolutely right. We hear a lot about learning loss. And I think it provides an opportunity for all of us to pause and say, really, what is learning loss? Especially, and I can speak specifically to our school district where our students have been able to be in session. We haven't closed a single day. We have students in the hybrid setting, but we, at the secondary level, we have a portion of our students who are completely virtual. But in all of those settings, we have a significant amount of learning going on. And I would sooner probably reframe learning loss to say, not so much loss, but different kind of learning. It really has been different. Just last night I was watching video of our kindergarten, one of our kindergarten classrooms that's completely virtual. But watching kids read, watching kids count out, individual objects. And I think about if kids can be doing that completely virtual at kindergarten for the families who've elected that, all the way up to our seniors in high school who are experiencing this hybrid model, which is actually, in a way, great in terms of setting them up for what comes next in college. I do start to think, I guess I just haven't seen it as loss. I've seen it as different. I've seen it as opportunity. I've seen it as an opportunity for all of us to count our blessings and to be so grateful for the fact that we've been able to be in at all this year. The fact that our teachers have done great work in pivoting, to be ready for this work. I also really appreciate the fact that our teachers have prioritized the curriculum. And I guess I say this because I'm a former social studies teacher, and I hope that people understand when I say something like this, that I do support the study of history. I'm not convinced we've needed to spend quite so much time on Mesopotamia anyway. So if that gets scaled down a little bit, is that the end of the world? The fact that we have maybe focused on some more life skills, the fact that we have embedded more relationship building in the conversation, the fact that algebra teachers have sat down and said, all right, if in the hybrid setting, we don't get to quite as many lessons as we would have traditionally, and we need to sit and prioritize what are the skills that our students most need as they move on to geometry or they move on to algebra 2. Those are great conversations to have. And I think in some ways it yields a school year, albeit not quite as much in-person time as we would have liked, but it leads to really active decisions being made about what is being taught and what our students should be learning. And by many measures, feedback that we're getting is pretty good in terms of the resilience of students and what they have been learning. So I guess that's kind of our perspective. It's not necessarily lost, but definitely different.
Different. Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. Let's turn to Clarence and then Angie.
Yes, good evening all. I agree with my colleague. There have been mixed reviews on the virtual platform for teaching and blended learning. However, in my district, our big challenge was I had to face inequities with children that did not have technological devices. That was my main concern. I wasn't too worried about whether the teaching staff, the pedagogical staff could handle the virtual platform, because once people get used to whether it's Zoom or Google Class or what have you, they understood it after a while. And our Borough support team, our support office, ran professional development sessions on getting the most out of virtual platforms. But there were some concerns around, particularly our students in temporary housing that were living in family havens, as they have some legalities around Wi-Fi connectivity, where, because children were under, were lacking economic, resources, they felt there were challenges about allowing Wi-Fi access because people could prey on them. So we had to be very mindful of how we allowed the access. We worked out arrangements with the family shelters as well as the Wi-Fi providers. So there were issues with the devices, and those inequities were kind of magnified during this time. Of course, the families that had devices, that had resources, we didn't have to worry about too much. But I also agree with my colleague that we made lemonade out of this situation. People became more flexible. We saw our teaching staff really becoming a bit more empathetic in their teaching style, a lot more patient during class time. Because as you know, when you walk into a teacher's room, they could be the most veteran teacher. They get a little nervous and they're afraid of silence, you see, and they'll ask the question, they'll answer it themselves if they don't get a response quick enough. So we found them to be a little less afraid of, allowing more think time and giving the children an opportunity to have the productive struggle. I believe in that. I believe in letting children struggle a little, because I know I learn best when I'm a little uncomfortable, and many of our children do. So the whole idea of the patience, the flexibility, and just allowing more think time was, really, I saw an improvement in the overall pedagogy. The teaching staff, I have a very large district. I have 32 schools. I have over 20,000 students. And then the whole idea of health accommodations became a challenge, because you can't say no to a health accommodation. And I had over 550 staff members with health accommodations. So that's what made me worry about learning loss. Not that the children weren't capable. We're the ones that have to catch up with them, technologically speaking. But the fact that we had so many staff members that were going to a virtual setting and teaching from the virtual setting for the first time, that's where our challenges, showed their ugly head. But I think we've done well overall, and I'm looking forward to getting back to brick and mortar. I will tell you that. But that was our experience with the idea of learning loss. It was just the challenges of the major adjustments we had to make.
Thank you, Clarence. And Angie?
I would certainly echo what Dr. Wood and Dr. Ellis said. I think the conversations that have been really fruitful with my administrative team is talking about whether there's actually a loss of content or loss of experience. And really, does that have a negative impact on kids? And I think people are getting too hung up on what they didn't have. And I think we should more be focusing on the quality of what they did have and how we've really transitioned into maybe spending a little bit more time on a core content as opposed to skating through this long list of standards. So on our end, I'm not convinced that everyone had learning loss. I'm not convinced of that. I do think that a fully remote student may have a completely different experience than students that might be in an in-person or hybrid model. I worry about some of the reasons why students are remote. And I think in some cases it may just to slightly disconnect with schools. And I find that really troublesome. And that's something that we're really working hard on bringing these kids back and trying to really get down to the root of why they're remote, because we believe in almost every instance, it's not a health issue.
So thank you, Angie. Going back to Clarence for just a moment, your numbers, the number of students, number of faculty is very large in comparison with most districts in New York State.
Yes.
So when you were working with teachers that were learning how to connect, they were learning the technology as they were teaching it. Did you have strategies that you were using in order to implement professional development and strategies for the teachers to learn quickly?
Yes, absolutely. That's a great question. What I will tell you, in the years past and historically, it's always been the 10 to 20-year veteran principal that had the most juice. They held court and they kind of dominated the way the vibe of professional development went in our district. But in this new virtual world, our newer principals, those who've grown up with technology, some of my new principals, they don't even know what a rotary phone is, for God's sake. They're the ones now that can bring this comfortability with the virtual world. So now it's a dynamic interchange. The veterans helping with strategy, administrative expertise, and subject area expertise, and the newer principals with this virtual expertise. It's a dynamic interchange. It's really helped us overall. What we've done, we found those principals that were sharpshooters in that regard. And during our principal conferences, they would break out in the afternoon. And the principals that were having challenges with, they would have study groups, so to speak, during the second parts of our principal conferences. And they would just work on each other, work with each other, and listen to the challenges and really explain the way to navigate around it. And over time, what happened, the principals that were having the difficulties, really practice makes perfect, as they say. And the more they did it, the more comfortable they were with it. Now, they're like old hats at it, so to speak. So I'm really, really impressed with that. We also have a borough center model. Because of the size of the New York City system, we have borough centers where in smaller districts, you have your district staff. You may have 40, 50 staff members in your district. We have a borough staff that will serve several large districts. And we have a technology, a DIIT unit. And we happen to have a prodigy in our office. In fact, we had our computers in our office were down for like 2 weeks. This guy came in and solved the problem in 3 hours. He's awesome. And what he did, he offered a lot of professional development for us at the district level and pockets of principals throughout our district that really helped us overall. And I was almost disappointed when they didn't have the standardized assessments last year, because I was really looking forward to it. And our style and stuff that we learned in SAGE as well is to lean into it and not to be defensive about standardized assessments, but not just to see it as what the children need and what their challenges are, but it serves a dual purpose. It lets us know what the staff needs and what the professional development needs are simultaneously, and everybody learns at the same time. So we were very grateful in that regard.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So let's move on to our next question. And Clarence, you're up first on this one. So I'd like to focus on our very young children, our youngest children, our pre-K through 1 children. The pandemic has caused a number of scenarios for our youngest children that may and will challenge them as well as educators this fall, assuming that we're opening in person to a large degree. Just a few of those different scenarios follow. So some children will be entering kindergarten in the fall without any preschool experience whatsoever. Parents will have kept them out with concerns about the pandemic. So they're entering for the first time into a kindergarten setting without any background or previous education.
Yes.
In other cases, kindergartners who were virtual learners this year will be starting in-person school for the first time as first graders. So their first experience with public school education will be first grade. They'll have missed a full year of attendance in person. And then in still other situations, parents have simply held their children back a year, perhaps even for various reasons. So generally speaking, how is your district addressing these critical and important transition issues, transitioning from home to school, one grade to another grade, and also readiness issues, the readiness issue of being in school, of learning in a different environment than what they had last year?
Wow, that's a great question. I'll do my best on that one. But first, we try to anchor our supports in terms of social emotional supports and mindfulness. We felt that, as you know, so many people were isolated for so long, starting with staff, parents, our students themselves, even especially we thought about children that were maybe was the only child, but you know, even if you have a sibling, to be stuck in a house with one sibling for a year straight would be kind of tough. So we centered it around mindfulness. We've been doing some work with the Contentment Foundation out of Bali. One of my classmates out of my cohort in Sage, works for them, and it's 4 major tenants. We were allowed to be part of a program with them, no charge to all of my schools. All 30 schools got the service for free, and did a lot of work with the adults first. And it focused on mindfulness, building outreach to community, self-curiosity, and contentment and balance. And we felt that was a nice approach to anchor these various challenges that are coming from 2 directions. So we also felt that, especially with self-curiosity, the children that were not in the school setting, we needed staff that were trained in how to deal with them and help to socialize them in terms of the social interaction that they missed out for a year. Because as you know, in pre-K kindergarten, a great deal of the learning is, as they say, most of what I learned in kindergarten, right? You know, learning how to play and share and understand that we need each other to thrive because we're communal beings. The next piece was we did a lot of work with finding out which virtual platforms could support the children. We did some work with IXL, and IXL is a platform that focuses on phonemic awareness and elementary reading comprehension, writing in the 4 major core subjects, math, science, social studies as well. It's based on New York State standards. We also use another virtual platform called Starfall, which is for younger children, but it's also self-paced. It'll go as far as they can go. And as you may be well aware, the younger children they're very technologically advanced. In fact, I see sometimes 3-year-olds that are very, very comfortable on iPads and desktops. So we've been fortunate where we were this year chosen to be part of a 3K program. So we're bringing 3-year-olds to the school setting, which is going to be very exciting. We're going to put 15 sections across our district, and we're going to get the accompanying professional development and that early childhood training that we'll need. We also this year we're fortunate. We took on something that was an offshoot of something a program in Boston called the Boston Basics. Ours is called the Brooklyn Basics, and it's a birth through age 3 literacy acquisition program where we help parents and new parents and parents that are pregnant and how to push the whole learning cycle before they even show up to school. So as such, we're a birth through 12 district, and I'm really, really proud of that. We have a lot going on, and it's a lot of moving parts. But I'm really, really impressed with another program we use called Raz Kids, and it's a reading program, but it offers a digital library, and there are multiple ability levels for the same title. That I'm really impressed with that as well. So these are the things we're trying to navigate in, and the main thing, it's based on social emotional supports for children, and that cannot be effective unless you have emotionally intelligent adults who are equitable in their mindset. So it's a lot going on, but we anchored our approach in mindfulness. We feel that meditation could be for the individual, but mindfulness is for the community, and that's the approach that we've taken in Crown Heights District 17.
Thank you, Clarence. That's a birth through 12. That's it's a big challenge. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to Angie.
So a district my size, which is significantly different than my two other colleagues, we are able to take a little bit more of a personal approach. It's a blessing and it's a curse that we know everyone, but we utilize that to our advantage during this time. We thought that kids are resilient and they've proved us right, keeping in mind that relationships are really important. So first and foremost, I gave all of my teachers the permission to focus on relationships over any rigor. That was first and foremost, because our concern was once they left us, they would have trouble coming back to us if those relationships weren't solid. So I think that was one of the things that we did quite well. In terms of planning for a go forward, we have decided to put our resources or reallocate our human resources towards our newest learners in kindergarten. There'll be a teaching assistant in every classroom with smaller class sizes, and we've assigned a speech and language pathologist, assuming that many of the kids have not gone through any type of preschool that would maybe identify any underlying developmental delays or anything that might have gotten picked up in preschool. So we're really working on developing a comprehensive plan. Many of our parents are reluctant to sending the kids in for kindergarten. They think, well, maybe we should just wait, but we certainly don't want, a problem to be kicked down the road. We'd rather have them in, put our eyes on them and work with them. And if they need, something different, we can work with them on that. But it's been very interesting. I think with all the technology, as we start to transition to the future, we really have to make sure that our faculty and staff are ready, that we've met them where they are and we've met their needs so that they're ready to dig into these new challenges. So a good portion of my efforts will be put towards that end to make sure that people have the rest and the support that they need.
Thank you. And Elizabeth?
Yes, thanks. Still similar and building on what I've heard. We are looking at, and we've done it the last several years, not last summer, but the previous summer, it's a kindergarten jumpstart program. We screen our incoming kindergartners and then we'll invite in ones who are not yet showing quite the readiness skills that we look for. It's been a very successful program. We are intending to offer a few additional sections. We're still in the process of screening our kindergartners to know whether that is, or our incoming kindergartners to know whether that is really even needed, whether we'll need additional sections, but we're prepared to offer additional sections. We'll say that to the points about kids being resilient and growing and building relationships, our kids typically, even ones previous years who have not come in with preschool, make tremendous growth in the first several months. And I, having been an elementary principal for 10 years prior to moving to central office, I would expect the kindergarten teachers coming down in early September and October and saying like, you cannot believe this. And just trying to say like, give it time. I know we're going to be amazed. And year after year, the kids prove us right when we are patient and we just continue to integrate them into the school and show them lots of tender loving care, but also set some parameters in terms of what the expectations are. And so I do believe that many of the students will catch up quite quickly. And the final point I'll make is our kids, we're finding, are very excited about the opportunity to either come to school or return to school. So I think that is working in our favor for many, certainly not all. And I want to emphasize a point Dr. Maloney made earlier about the reasons some of the kids and families have stayed home. When we have the opportunity to really think clearly about who we should be offering the virtual learning for going forward, now that vaccines are so widely available, we have to be awfully careful about saying yes to, and this isn't really, it's going to be a very hard thing if it's left to local schools, but saying yes to families who just do it on a whim versus have a significant health need, to the point Dr. Maloney made, that's a very important thing. We do have some children in all districts that are being held out more for convenience of families. And, there are some long-term concerns about that. And I think we really have to be very honest and clear about that. And we don't really want to become the health screeners about who can stay home and who can't. But if that means that's what's best for kids to get more back in school so that they're not, providing childcare at home or making it easier for mom and dad, that is something that really needs to be part of the conversation moving forward as we continue to look at who will be eligible for virtual or not.
Elizabeth, could I follow up on that question or on that comment that you made in terms of, I think it's going to be a kind of a tricky conversation, I think, with some parents, and every district's going to be experiencing this, and that is those students who may be held back for reasons that don't make good educational sense. So what have you thought about your approach to how you're going to work with those parents and encourage those students back into school?
So we are starting with some really affirmative messages this spring with, we are planning for all kids to be back. And we're just putting that out in our messaging. We think some of it is just needing to overwrite the script of being home being an option. The other thing is this last year, we had it in large enough numbers in terms of the kids staying home. We were about 25%. We provided a virtual option in almost all of our elementary schools, or at least we have sister schools, so it's like 2 elementary schools connected. It really created a kind of comfort, which when we use April thinking to reflect on September, it was probably a good decision at that time. When we use our current April thinking for next September, we will not make it as easy. Right, we are going to be talking about some district sections of virtual options, and therefore there has to be an understanding that they would be leaving the attachment of the homeschool to go. So I think we in our messaging can do some of the work to first start with, we're expecting everybody back, we're going to have space for everybody, even if regardless of what we need to do, and assuming all the the regulation changes that we keep hearing continue to move forward. And continue to do what we believe is best for kids, which is to get them back in school, whatever that takes. We're going to be ready, and we want to send that messaging early. And we also are going to make sure that families understand that the completely virtual option will be different if we're required to offer it next year. And some of the conveniences put in place this year may not be there, because I saw a statement in the chat about the social emotional impact on kids. And I know we're going to get to that later, but that is a very real part of why we need our kids back in school.
Well, thanks, Elizabeth. That's a great response. You obviously have been giving that an awful lot of thought. Angie and Clarence, would you like to respond to that issue also, trying to determine which students will be receiving virtual in the fall, and which students, and how you're going to encourage students that may want virtual but really don't qualify for it or aren't in a good position for it?
I could just jump in really quickly because I know Dr. Maloney has some thoughts on it. I think that like I have 2 nieces. One's in middle school and one's in high school. The one that's in middle school has never been to her middle school yet, because right around the time she started, within a few months, I mean, she's been there a couple of months maybe, and she's happy. She does well. They're both top-notch students. I have other youngsters that I'm in contact with. They love this idea of the virtual instruction, but but they still link up with each other virtually. They're on TikTok. They're on FaceTime all the time because they miss each other, and I think that's a big part of it as well. A big part of that whole experience during middle and high school is that adolescent interaction and how we take advantage of peer instruction as well. It isn't just the adults teaching, they're learning from each other. I do think that one of the other little snippets of lemonade that we get from this experience is that technically a child never has to be absent again, as long as they're home and can turn their computer on. So I'm trying to encourage our principals, although I will be leaving that district July 1st, by the way, but my principals still understand that it's a great idea to just encourage kids to get in school. I think the parents are looking forward to bringing them back, quite frankly. I think the parents have a renewed respect for what we do. They all felt, they all consider us teachers. They don't care what your role is. You can be a superintendent, whatever. You get off at 3 o'clock, you have the summers off, everything's a big party. That's what they think. Until now, they had to regain the responsibility as a primary educator. And so many of them reach out and just write an email to me saying, thank you I underestimated what you guys do every day, the planning, the focus, what it takes to keep children on track. And it makes me feel good that they realize that, you know, we do more than they thought we did. In terms of getting children back, my big concern is a pocket of children in my district that are what we call, you know, we're pushing for everybody to get this vaccination, but there's a pocket of children and families in my district that are anti-vaxxers. They don't take any type of vaccination. So that throws the formula of social distancing and all that good stuff out of the window. What happens if they don't want to take the vaccination? How will we handle them? How many of them will there be? And, you know, we can't ask them, you know, you really can't even ask if you're taking it or not. You know, it could be a HIPAA violation. So there's all these challenges that are in place now. I'm looking forward to the majority of my district returning to physical brick and mortar school. You know, I hope that the ones that, you know, that have to remain on the virtual platform do indeed need it for legitimate reasons and aren't just like, you know, like my colleague said, just taking advantage of something that they think they can take advantage of at the moment. Because in the long run, we are communal beings and we, you know, social interaction is super important. Even the idea of like, you know, if they want to opt out of his exams, when they become adults, they can't opt out of competition in life. So I just think it's really important that they get back and get back with each other.
Okay, thank you, Clarence.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
I would just only add that I think, you know, in addition to showing our community what schools actually do, I think it exploited some of the challenges that we've had as a society. You know, students that are underserved in areas of mental health and access to counseling and access to technology, and all of those things have really been exploited. And unfortunately, many of the students that we had worries about before the pandemic chose to go remote, and our inability to put our eyes on them on a daily basis has caused a great deal of concern. And, you know, we just wonder what's going on with them, and we worry about their physical and mental health. So I'm hoping that there's a really streamlined process for students to be able to select remote, and that it's not just because they want to.
Yeah.
Because we don't think that's the best model, and we always try to provide the best model.
Thank you. So we have a question from the audience that is very appropriate for at this time. Are there policies that you have in your districts, or are policies being crafted around what constitutes the reasons why a family would stay virtual? Is that work in progress?
I don't know, because we thought, like, I'll just say, I can speak for this region, and, you know, maybe Dr. Ellis can chime in about what happened in New York City, but, and Dr. Maloney, correct me, but we went into the summer, late spring, summer, thinking kids were going to come back. And we were not feeling as though we needed to provide a virtual option until we got a very clear message that needed to be offered. And then we were all scrambling this summer to try to do something that had never been done before. And I think we did so very well, but I guess I just say, I don't see that as really a local decision. I mean, we certainly could try to pull together policies, but at the end of the day, for us to do something different than, you know, 10 miles down the road where Dr. Maloney is the superintendent, I'm just not convinced that that's the direction to go. I think that there has to be some sort of policy leadership on a much larger scale, especially to have it hold up, because parents really, you know, they're going to follow the law of the land, but they want what they want when it comes to the individual school district.
Right. Thank you. Any other comments on that question?
I would agree with Elizabeth. This has got to be a public policy type issue that's, you know, systemic throughout New York State. If individual schools are left to this, we're going to really have inequities amongst students and districts. And I think that further puts us in a bad place.
Okay.
I definitely agree with my colleagues. When we first went to the virtual setting in mid-March of last year, again, like my colleagues reiterated, we all felt September we'd be ready to rock and roll. And when we came back in October, and because of the enormity and the size of our district, we were instituting weekly COVID random testing every week for every school. So basically 20% of staff and whoever showed up, 20% of students and staff, whoever showed up in the building, were getting COVID tests. And as you know, the challenge was, especially with children that are under 16, a lot of research says most of them are asymptomatic. And they're still running around, running through walls, having a good time. But when the adults get it, it becomes very, very gravely serious. And we would come up with a couple of cases, 2-3 cases in the school. My schools were opening and closing so rapidly. I didn't even have ideas which schools were open on a given day. So what I started doing every morning was sending out a survey by way of my administrative assistant to find out which schools were open or closed, because they had a central office, kind of like track and trace upstate, but in the city it was called a situation room, and they would dialogue and interact with the school, sometimes up to the wee hours of the morning, and only to say the school is going to close the next day. So that was a huge challenge. So I agree with my colleagues. It's got to be something that we can rely on, and in different settings there are different dynamics. You know, I do know in more rural settings, there's more space, people feel more comfortable. Schools stayed open more regularly in terms of brick and mortar, but in a more dense urban settings, you know, parents weren't as comfortable. They felt a little more afraid, as well as staff, and the schools were closing more readily. So I agree with my colleagues wholeheartedly.
Thank you. That great question. Thank you. That was from Barbara Hasty, cohort 14. And there are some other questions too that we will try to get to as time goes on, but I do want to move to the next topic, and that is social emotional learning. And Dr. Maloney, you'll be first up in terms of responding to this one, but we've known for a long time that physical security and emotional supports are necessary for children to perform their best as learners. And the responses that you've had to the other two, the first two questions, all three of you have mentioned social emotional supports and learning in your responses. So as we think about and contemplate the return of students to school, we need to address SEL, of course. And would you share your thoughts and practices regarding how your district is addressing the social emotional issues that your students certainly will be experiencing as a result of COVID-19?
Yes. So for our district, we started out as we were transitioning into the summer and trying to figure out what September would look like. We created a series of task force, and one of our task force, which included teachers, was on social emotional supports. And that was a really important task force because I think I got a little bit more buy-in from people. And as our, teacher leaders presented some of the challenges that our kids may face and offered the district leadership some suggestions about what type of professional development they might need to meet the students where they were, that it just became more of a family. I think we bonded together more about attending to these needs. In terms of resources, I don't have a lot of resources. We're a traditionally underfunded school, but I did make it a priority to hire a part-time school counselor. And that part-time school counselor had the sole purpose of interacting with students that were remote and students that we were having trouble finding, that were unengaged, that we couldn't get to. And that was just her sole focus. And I think that was money and a resource well spent, because we didn't want remote students or students that were out of sight to be out of mind. So having one person that's sole responsibility was to take care of that was really important. And as we look towards some of our federal funds that we received and some additional supports, we will likely have them in the areas of social emotional supports. That was identified as an area of concern before the pandemic. And if you read the latest NYSBA issue, oh, you can't see it because I've got a background, but it says, studies show morale has declined during the pandemic. I think that's pretty obvious, but actually seeing a graphic to support that further, I think exaggerates some of the challenges that people have had. We've recently read about adolescents committing suicide. We know some students haven't been in their eyesight of a school in a long time. So that's one of our biggest worries. What has worked for us is home visits. Literally going to the home and really making it a point to grab some teachers or some school counselors, and for it not to be a negative thing, but just to go to the door. Hey, I noticed you haven't checked in a while. That has been very, very powerful for us.
Okay, thank you, Angie. So let's go to Dr. Wood. Elizabeth?
Yeah, thanks. So we also focused on relationships. I heard that mentioned earlier, really talking about how do we foster deeper connections. We know that that is the key to learning. It's what helps kids want to come back to school. We had in the works for probably a year and a half or 2 years that we would be working to shift to a block schedule at the secondary level, actually middle school and high school. And where you were, Dr. Huntley, up in Queensbury, we heard from a number of teachers who ended up coming to work for us, saying that one thing that they missed the most was working in a block schedule. And we heard that loud and clear from a number of teachers. Why? More time for deeper learning, but really an opportunity to take a breath and work on your relationships with kids. And so we already had that in the works. And then comes COVID and contact tracing. And we say, gosh, it's a lot better to have 4 contacts in a day than it is to have 9. And so we ended up implementing it a year earlier. The feedback we're getting is there is more opportunity for teachers to have a conversation with students, to check in, spend less time on some of the procedural things. So it was definitely an opportunity for us to move forward with that plan a little bit sooner. To the point about home deliveries, we have had a lot of that happening throughout the system. In fact, our high school team recently did a whole bunch of care package deliveries for exactly as you said, it's not punitive in any way. It was just trying to engage, like, we still care about you. We want to see you. We're coming to your home. We're going to deliver this little goodie bag. That was for a large number. I don't know why I say a large number, 80, 100 home visits. We also have been holding some student focus groups. Dr. Robinson, the superintendent, and I recently did about 6 different sessions of student focus groups at the high school, asking things like, what's working for you right now? What's not working for you right now? How can we help? How can you feel more empowered as a learner in our system? And just asking kids what they think, it's miraculous. What they think about and what they're willing to share with you, but how empowered they feel and how positive that is for their own social and emotional learning.
And what a great message to everyone, students, faculty, and parents, to provide that sort of opportunity that you're listening at the highest level. So, thank you. Dr. Ellis?
Yeah, my colleagues have some great ideas. I'm writing them down. I'm stealing all your ideas. Don't worry. But I will say that one of the things that we were instituting prior to the pandemic was this idea of social emotional supports. When I arrived to the district, this district had 23 focus schools out of 32, over 3,000 suspensions a year. And it was just, discipline means to teach, not to punish. So if I was to ask you what your discipline was, you would tell me what you majored in college. You wouldn't say punishment, but we got around that. We worked on social emotional supports from the moment I got to the district in 2014. As a result, we started pushing curricula like Love and Logic. We did a lot of work with Yale and Mark Brackett through the Ruler program. We also have schools where kids identify their mood on a large mood meter before they even walk into the classroom. So the teachers know exactly what they're feeling the minute they walk in the classroom. And then in terms of social emotional supports all around, and then in terms of getting to know the students, many of my lower grades in the elementary schools have adopted this philosophy of looping. The teachers go up several years in a row with the same class. So I believe in meeting new people, of course, but if you already know the child, and you already know their tendencies and their idiosyncrasies, you can get right down to work right away. The children know the rules, they know the teachers' preferences, the teachers understand the children's learning styles, and we've seen some benefit to that. We've also engaged in using food pantries for our children with food insecurities and their families, and we think that's really helped as well. And just that overall family support, because these are tough times for many people. And we felt that's really pushed us in the right direction. So we're eager to come back to school, but whoever needs to stay in that setting, we feel that we'll be amply and be able to prepare and support them in a formidable fashion. So we've been really fortunate. We also know that you can't teach social emotional learning to students unless you have emotionally intelligent adults. So one of the added benefits is the adults learn about looking at themselves and self-reflection before we apply these tenets to children. So that's one of the ultimate benefits, and you can really gain traction with that, and that can help many, many students for years to come. So that's what we've done.
Well, thank you so much, all three of you, for great responses to that social emotional learning issue that everybody's going to be addressing probably now, but certainly as students come back in the fall. So we're moving on very quickly with time. I do have a couple more questions left, and let me just condense this last question to this, and we'll start with Dr. Wood. What is it that you want to keep? The COVID-19 experience has been a real challenge. It's been something that we really would not choose to go through, but there are some really positive things that have come out of COVID-19. What do you want to keep? What new practices would you like to stay?
So I have two. One is significant, and I think the other one is just a convenience. But I think this idea that kids can learn anywhere, and I think we have fought that for too long as a system. We haven't understood it. I think I was told about Google Meet many times before actually, March 13th last year, and I said, yeah, let's get together. But I think, the idea that kids can wake up and have a migraine and yet still tune into the class and not have missed the whole day, that's really powerful. And that can be if grandma's sick out in Buffalo and the family needs to go out, and that child can go and spend time with grandma, but still connect with the class. Now, how we're going to work through that when we have lots of kids who would just like to use that to sleep in, that's going to be a challenge. And I don't pretend that that's going to be easy, but I also don't think it's going to go away. And it's something that we're going to have to learn how to embrace, because if it's really about the learning, the location where the learning is, we're going to have to figure out, like, how do we get you here when we can, and recognize that other times you might be learning from afar. And the second thing that I think is here to say, in addition to all the great digital platforms, some of which are great, some of which we look forward to having kids back in person so we don't have to leverage them as much, it is simply the ability to connect, like this forum, like this panel, with our leadership team across the district, not getting in our car. The amount of context we can have in a day when we're not building in 15 minutes of travel to go to all of our various schools. And that much like to the professional development we've all been able to do in the last year that we just would not have been able to engage in otherwise. I think that some of these things are real keepers that will never go back to what it was, where we drive everywhere to connect with folks.
Thank you. Dr. Ellis? You're muted. You're muted, Clarence. There you
I said some good stuff there. Anyway, but I think that really this idea of the spirit of team has been resurrected during this time. I think that in brick and mortar before the COVID pandemic, we started, my district kind of started drifting into like, this is my classroom, you come in when I let you in. But now I think we know that we need each other again. And you can never underestimate the power of, someone else, just a few kind words and how it makes you feel. Second is this idea of this spirit of empathy in our district. People understanding that everyone has different challenges. I have a couple of principals, one in particular she's been in her condo for 1 full year. She hasn't come out. She has a pre-existing health condition. I can only imagine the kind of stress she's under, because isolation can do really terrible things to a person. And then the last thing I would say is this, the never-ending push for us to elevate our standards and our expectations. Because I always felt expectations were what I felt your potential could be, but standards was what I felt was minimally acceptable from you. And they both have to be super, super high. And I think that, we know children will rise or sink to the expectations that we set for them. And they've proven, like my colleagues have echoed this sentiment today, that the children have definitely lived up. They've surpassed our expectations in terms of how well we've done during the pandemic. Because although there was no standardized assessments, we've all engaged in formative assessments. And I got to tell you, my district has, really, if this is an accurate predictor, my district's held their own. My district overall has held their own. And I'm really happy about that. So that meant we were able to adapt to this virtual form of instruction, and the children were able to, suck it all in and receive it all. and process it all, and the children are amazing. And I'm just trying to keep up with them. We can't, in other words, we can't hold them back. And that's what this has shown me, that we've been holding them back in terms of, how far they can go with this technology. So that's what I've learned from it.
Thank you so much. We do have a couple of questions that have popped up. So I wonder if I can direct these questions at our panelists. Angie, there was a question earlier relative to APPR. Could you address how you're approaching APPR? What are the differences, and what are there issues that you're dealing with, and how are you addressing those issues?
So I'm not sure if this is the right approach, but my approach has been, APPR should be an opportunity to collaborate professionally between a leader and a teacher. It should never be punitive. The numbers shouldn't matter. And so we've just continued on with that. I think with not having the expectation of a test, that relieved a lot of the pressure, but I still wanted our principals to go through the process with fidelity and use it as an opportunity to really grow, connect with individual teachers as they're persevering through this pandemic. So for me, I didn't really have a different mindset, but I could see the difference in the worry and concern from teachers.
Thank you. And there was one other question on special education, and we only have a couple of minutes left. So Elizabeth, do you want to start in terms of consideration that you've provided special education students that may be different than what you've been doing, or plans that might be different in the future, and identifying students that are special education students?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the service for the students that have been either completely virtual or in a hybrid setting, I think the services that they have gotten from staff have been very good. I'm thinking about some of our specialized programs where some of the students have been, medically fragile and really needed to stay home. And I'm thinking about the program delivery expectations on those teachers, which is, all right, you only had 6 students to begin with, 3 are in person, 3 are at home. You got to figure out a way to make that work for a hybrid. I think by and large, our folks have done very good work with it and really taken individual student needs into consideration. I have heard that a few times this year, concerns have arisen about a student potentially having a disability, and not atypical. We've had to go back and say, have you really tried these interventions? Or, this year isn't just the year to say, oh, we'll just identify the child, even though we haven't done our part to make sure that we are really providing quality instruction and then measuring the growth that goes along, in a true intervention model. So I think all in all, it's been pretty consistent to previous years. Although I will say again, kudos to the special education teachers for providing the supports. It's been a heavy lift, but I think a lot of quality work has happened.
Thank you. Dr. Steele told me that time would fly for this webinar, and he was absolutely right. Time has flown. We have a couple of minutes left. I want to thank the panelists. What a great conversation we've had over the last hour. And I hope that if we turn back to the title, Pivoting During a Pandemic, Systems and Structures to Respond to COVID-19, boy, if the audience was taking notes, you're going to have pages full of notes like I do, with a systemic approach and a structural approach to addressing the issues that public schools are now faced with. So with 1 minute left, I'm turning this back over to Dr. Steele.
Thank you, Doug. And thank you, Elizabeth, Angie, and Clarence for a very enlightening afternoon of discussion. The title, as Doug said, pivoting during a pandemic. You really have to think about all the different aspects of what you do in education. I mean, the last topic, Elizabeth, on students with disabilities. And then you think about how do we adjust to that and their needs and how, and all of that. It's incredible. But I think as I've listened to you and actually over the whole series of these webinars, each of them have offered a multitude of good ideas to take back and put into practice within your districts. Each of you are, you know, it's apparent that you're doing an outstanding job, even with the hardship that you faced in the past year. But I think the opportunity here is to take what you've learned during this time and move forward and utilize those good practices for the future. So I just want to tell the audience that's still with us, we were able to get a number of questions in from the audience in the time that we have. And I just want to remind everyone that this was recorded today. So you please let other people, you know, just go to the Hawk Springs Center website at Russell Sage College. They can view all of these. I think there's, like I said, there's something to take away from each one of these webinars. And my final words are the last in the series will be on equity. And our good friend, Dr. Oliver Robinson will be moderating that. And, you know, that's going to be an interesting, how do we maintain equity during the pandemic? And I know I've talked to Clarence a little bit about that, and especially in terms of New York City and some of the things that he's discussed today. So on behalf of the Hawk Springs Center at Russell Sage and the New York State Council of School Superintendents, NSCUS, I want to thank all of you for being with us this afternoon, and I wish you all the best and for the rest of the year and starting again next September. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care, Dr. Steele.
Take care.